Oh, there we go. Okay. So, let's share the screen.
All right, so back. Welcome back, everybody. Hello. We have winter. This is enough winter.
Yeah.
This works for Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's. We're good. Don't need any more of it.
A nice pretty snowfall.
That's pretty.
Yeah, so at least there's that, but it's gonna be 50 on Friday, so. Anyway, so yeah, so welcome back to Alexander. You get to listen to me talk more today. Yeah. So we finally got through everything, not fine, I shouldn't say it like that way. We got through everything with Philip and the background for Alexander, and that's important because a lot of times it feels like these figures just kind of come up out of nowhere, and we get that feeling, and it's just like, it's not, there's a lot of background that put Alexander in the place where he was. So that's important. But anyway, so let's talk about Alexander. And of course, we're going to start with his parents, because that's how that worked. Jay talked about Philip's wives already, so we're going to focus in on Olympias here. Now, she is either Philip's fourth or fifth wife. We're not sure. The timeline is iffy because the other wife that she might, that might be the fourth or the fifth, is the mother of Philip III Arrhidaeus, and he was born a few months before Alexander. So they're marking by the births of the boys. There's not a specific date that we know that he married the other wife. Okay, we have the date for this, which of course I didn't write down, but because it's important, because it's Alexander, but the other one, who cares, right? And at this point too, we're talking about wives. Yes, there's official marriages, and there's women that he was having children with. So, is she an official wife, the other one versus Olympias? She was not high on the list either way, so we'll worry about that. But anyway, so Olympias is a princess. She is the daughter of the king Neoptolemus of the Molossians in Epirus. Generally, you hear her spoken about as being an Epirite or a Molossian. That's not quite the same thing, but it's close enough for what we're dealing with here. And she's born around 375. Again, even for princesses, they're not important enough to write down when they were born. Just, you exist, you survived through your first year, that's good, okay. So I can see them, there we go. We don't know who her mother is. Like Philip, like many kings of that era, her father had a lot of women in the court, and we don't know which one of them was her mother. We think her mother was of Trojan descent, because Olympias claimed that she was descended from Priam, from the king of Troy, that is in the Iliad and the Odyssey. So with the Iliad, at that point, it's kind of really hard to trace. So there was maybe Trojan ancestry there, maybe not.
And also, think of it this way, that if you're a ruler, you're part of a royal family, a lot of times you're, in theory, in quotes, related to a demigod, or you're related to one of these, ancient kings or, royal lines. Maybe not necessarily the case.
Yeah.
Just, but the idea that you're claiming descent from someone who is important in Greek mythology or the Greek world.
And that should say his family, I goofed up there. His family claimed descent from Achilles. Okay. So you see, they're all, the Greeks all have to connect themselves to the Trojan War, because that's what we do. Whether or not any of that is true is, at this point, moot point. She was named Polyxena when she was born, and then she takes the name Myrtale shortly before she marries Philip. She becomes Olympias later. We'll come to that. We don't know a lot about her childhood, other than she was well educated, a little probably better educated than most women of her era. Certainly better educated than anybody who was in the lower classes, as would be standard at the time. The Molossians were unusual in that they allowed women a little more autonomy than most other Greek cultures. Molossian women held citizenship in their own right. So they were not just citizens for the purpose of providing citizenship to the boys that they produce. Okay, they were their own citizens. They couldn't vote, but nobody voted because it was a kingdom. So they could own property in their own name. That's another big one. Okay, and they could act as guardians for their children if their husband died. So those are big, big legal things that a lot of women in the ancient world did not have. So she was accustomed to a culture where she had some power in and of herself. Okay. Now, admittedly, she's accustomed to power because she's a princess too. That helps. But to go into a society where women were not, where women were definitely second-class citizens would have probably been a bit of a culture shock for her. Yeah. So in 360, her uncle, Aribas, succeeded her father as a king. Okay. Her brother did not get to be king yet. It went down the brothers and then into the sons, just like what you talked about with Philip and the Macedonians. Okay. So in uh in 357, remember we're going backwards on years here. So 3 years later, Aribas makes an alliance with Philip, and Olympias, young Olympias, is part of the negotiations. Okay. Um, so she's 16 or 17, give or take. Um, maybe 18 at best. Like I said, we're not quite sure when she was born. So that's actually pretty good. Um, for that era, for a woman of royal descent, a girl of royal descent, to not be married off before that is lucky for her. So this was obviously a politically advantageous marriage, but it is possible that this was done directly at Philip's request. Okay. Olympias was a very religiously active woman. Okay. She belonged to a lot of different, excuse me, she belonged to a lot of different cults. Okay. A lot of different, I hesitate to call it faiths, I guess you could. Remember when we're talking about cults in the ancient world, it's not like cults now. Okay, it's more akin to different faiths, from the way we see it. But she was initiated into the Calibieri mysteries, okay, which is about the Calibieri brothers, which is a mythological story that I don't have at the front of my head at the moment. But anyway, so she gets initiated into those. Philip happened to be in the same group of initiates, class of initiates, whatever you want to call it. And supposedly he fell head over heels in love with her. Okay, fine. We'll accept that. Uh, maybe. I'm not going to say no, never, but I'm a bit of a pragmatist when it comes to that type of thing. And I think he probably saw a woman that he wanted to possess who was too valuable to just possess her outright. And so he had to negotiate. And, if he already has these negotiations going on with her uncle, that makes sense to, request that. So, and if he goes to the uncle and says, I've fallen madly in love with her, that's a lot nicer than, I want to strip your niece. So there might be a nice little love story here or not. So she's a member of this cult, but she's also the one she's most associated with is the cult of Dionysus. Okay. Now, Dionysus, of course, is the god of wine and party and pleasure and all sorts of fun. Also deeply associated with snakes, okay, and snake handling. Dionysus is also later associated in Rome with a women's cult that is supposedly goes out into the woods and captures men and kills them. They don't. That's not what's going on, but Rome uses that as an excuse to shut it down. We're not there yet. But it is the cult of Dionysus, the women in the cult of Dionysus do have a threatening air around them to a lot of the men who are in their lives.
And the thing with Dionysus too is that while he's celebrated in the Greek world, he's also a cautionary tale. Because the idea that, since he's a god of grapes, a god of wine, god of excess, with the ancient Greeks, it's good to honor him to a degree, but not to go overboard with it. Because in the Greek world, you're supposed to be, as a man in the Greek world, you're supposed to be in control of your emotions. You're supposed to be in control of yourself, even during these things. And, one of the things that's kind of different about, these Greece itself versus further north, when they're doing in Greece, when they're doing these, festivals for Dionysus, the wine is watered down so that it's not as potent. Not the case in Macedonia, not the case in Epirus. It's full blown. It's safe to say that,
A good chunk of the population was drunk a good part of the time.
yes, yes. Alexander and Philip were known for getting totally wasted along with the men that were with them and then getting into fights with each other. It was not unusual for, them to get really deep into their cups and then literally lose control and kill one of the people who are in the group. Yeah, one of the people who's going to save Alexander's life at the beginning of his military campaign, Alexander snaps at one of these.
You can safely say that Philip and Alexander were functional alcoholics.
Yes.
Very easy. You could, put a modern term on it.
Yeah.
But keep in mind too that the wine that they're drinking is not necessarily going to be quite as high
Yeah.
alcohol content as ours would be. Yeah. And it's better than getting dysentery from the water. So there you go.
And they would have been used to it because
Right, because
they have the tolerance with it. So
these cults, like in today's world, they'd be more like clubs or associations, not like religions.
Think of it more like, it's so hard to, okay, so ancient religions, we come up in this idea of there is a religion, you pick a religion, and that's what you're going to do. Okay, and you might change that at some point in your life, but you're only doing that one. Okay. So, in the ancient world, you had lots of gods to pick and choose from. And you venerated whichever one was most useful to you at that time. And that was the cult of whichever god. That's just the term for it. So you have the cult of Dionysus, you have the cult of Isis, you have the cult of Hera, you have the cult of Zeus, you have the cult of Apollo, on and on.
yeah, it's kind of like, and think of it that you're not necessarily, it's not like we would think of as the Vatican. There's not really, well, no, like a centralized, a very centralized, hierarchical, positions inside. I mean, there are positions inside there, but it's not as tightly controlled. So you have like a city where the cult supposedly has its main temple, but there are temples for that in every other city, everywhere else. And these are not gods who are saviors, like Christ. These are gods that you bargain with.
Yeah.
You want a good deal for business. You want to make sure that your pregnant wife is going to survive the pregnancy. So you're praying to one god or goddess, and then when she's in childbirth, you're praying to another one in order to make sure that the child and hopefully your wife survives it.
All the
So-
while praying to another one, sacrificing to another one to make sure you have a boy.
Yeah.
That kind of.
So you're kind of going back and forth. Again, it's the idea that you're bargaining with these things.
Yeah.
None of them are, it's not like you're expecting them to, by worshiping them, you're gonna get into an afterlife
Yeah.
necessarily.
The social club analogy isn't a bad one.
Yeah.
Actually, now that I'm thinking on it,
Yeah.
because it is the kind of thing where you're going to, you might go to the services of Apollo on Monday night, and then, Wednesday night, you're over at the Temple of Isis or something like that.
And you're building associations with different people
Yeah.
Right.
in those areas.
And some of the same, you're gonna have overlap. It's hard for us to wrap our head around coming up in the monotheistic culture that we have. And it's troubled historians too, because there is this big question of how much was this genuine belief and how much was it just usefulness. and effectiveness in a social club. Now, yeah, and that's a hard one to say, and we even have writings from ancient authors. Cicero in particular writes basically. Cicero was a priest of a half a dozen cults, okay? But you get the impression that he was what we would consider an atheist. But he was a priest of those cults because it was politically useful, it was socially useful, and it was a how to put it. I have to come back to the monotheistic thing. Let's see, this is what K through 12 Catholic school does to you. Thomas Aquinas has the reasons for believing in God, and the last of them is just in case. And I think a lot of the ancient world, it was a just in case. It was also who most benefited you. So let's say to use your example, you go sacrifice at the temple of Hera for a successful and healthy childbirth, right? And that comes through for you. So okay, so Hera's done well by me. And then later on, you're like, okay, well, I'm gonna go sacrifice at the temple of Apollo to make sure that the child stays healthy. And then like 50% of infants in the ancient world, the child dies. Well, okay, Apollo didn't help me. So then you're gonna go, okay, I'm not gonna sacrifice to Apollo next time. I'm gonna pick a different god. It's a strange thing to wrap your head around if you haven't come up in it. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question.
So I'm just
Yeah.
wondering how this is gonna show up in the future.
Oh, monotheism is one of those things that is a really unusual thing in human history. It pops up, it is very specific, it is very
Exclusive to start with.
exclusive, yeah. Well, it's still exclusive.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I don't know if we'll go backward, if you call that backward, I don't, now that I said that, I don't like backward, yeah. If we'll return to that kind of ideology. I don't know, but it'd be more fun, I think.
And also, when you're looking at these different ancient cultures, they borrow from each other, or they're like, okay, so this particular god is very similar to yours. And so sometimes they combine the names, or you could worship at that particular temple to your god.
Yeah, there were shared temples too.
And then sometimes they would open other temples for foreign gods, usually in the outskirts, not necessarily where, the heart of the city is going to be, but close to where you'd have these colonies of foreigners living in there. The idea, you need certain craftsmen that don't necessarily know how to work with a particular type of luxury good or whatever. So there are colonies of craftsmen and merchants who are foreigners who stay in your city.
The
Surprise,
Romans
surprise.
were big on that, yeah.
Wouldn't that be kind of like how some Christians will worship saints?
Yeah, kind of.
And that's an argument too, that when it comes to different sects in Christianity, okay, so there's God, he's broken into a trinity. Is that polytheism? There's God, and then there's all the saints. Is that polytheism? Because you choose a patron saint, okay, to protect you. That's one of the big things why Islam is created, is the idea that Islam is a strictly monotheistic religion. There is only God, not broken into a trinity. No saints are worshipped. There's still angels, that are in the hierarchy, but for the most part, they are eliminating what they viewed as polytheism.
The Puritans did the same thing.
Yeah.
I can give you the Catholic answer to that, which is you do not worship the saints and the Virgin Mary, you venerate them. Because that's different.
Yeah. Veneration, your intercession.
Yeah, you're asking like you are requesting of the saints to make a request to God or through Christ to do whatever it is that you know. Saint Joseph, so Saint Anthony is the god of this patron saint of missing things. Yeah, Saint Anthony, please find me my keys.
And meanwhile, just think of it like a call center. All the saints just sitting there, like, how can I direct you? And then
Oh,
they're like,
image. Okay.
yeah, like, oh God, it's another one.
I love that image. All right, so yeah, so Yeah. Social club with a bit of religious ideology, with a bit of not a bit of a very, very self-oriented in all of it too, so.
And again, the further north you go, the further away from mainland Greece you go, the more in quotes native those pantheons get to, because again, the Greeks thought the Macedonians were, barbaric cousins. Macedonians think that the Epirites are their barbaric cousins. So it's just, on the other side of the hill, it's another, it's another clan.
It's a politically useful thing too.
Yeah.
If you have the, to use an example from the Peloponnesian War, in Athens, there was a cult of, what's the Greek name for Priapus? Where'd it go? Hermes, okay, who you will hear as Mercury, in the Roman pantheon, but people would have, they venerated Hermes because he was a god of travel, like Mercury, but he was also a fertility god. Okay, so a lot of people in Athens would have statues of Hermes in their garden. Okay, like we might have a garden gnome or something, I guess, or maybe a religious statue. Well, the night before a massive fleet was supposed to set out in the Second Peloponnesian War, somebody went through Athens and knocked all the penises off the statues.
Oh, bad sign. Dun dun dun.
So, now we've had this religious attack, right? Okay, which my undergrad teacher, the first time I ever heard this story, he ends it with saying, he's like, I'm sure there's the equivalent of a shoebox under some teenager's bed in Athens that they're gonna find someday that's just gonna be full of these stone work penises, but so yeah. But that became a religious excuse for why they lost part of that war. And it became a religious excuse for why they then went after the guy who was in charge of that war, Alcibiades, and they, forced him out of the city because they said he caused it or he did it. And so there's a lot of politics to it too, that is can be very useful and equally damning. We lost the war. Well, there's not enough people who were sacrificing to Athena or whoever. Yeah.
And even with, Olympias taking the name Olympias, the most important, location in the Greek world is Mount Olympus.
Yeah, well,
Well,
I haven't
stealthy, but-
come to that yet, but
Oh,
no,
sorry.
she gets the name Olympias because she or her uncle gave Philip a horse that won in the races of the Olympics. So he grants her that name. So it's
Yeah.
not necessary, but I guess it does associate
Yeah.
too with that, so.
So she was
Right.
named after a horse?
No, she was named after the fact that a horse that she gave him won.
Oh,
Olympics.
She was named after the event.
the race.
Yeah,
okay.
I guess the larger event, yeah.
Good thing it wasn't the triathlon.
Yeah. Okay, so she's a member of the cult of Dionysus, okay, and so she does have this supposed love of snakes. Now, I tried to find any imagery of her. There is very little imagery of any of these women. I tried to make a nice little family tree with Philip's wives, and the only ones that there are any imagery of is Olympias and the last one, Cleopatra Eurydice. So that didn't work. The image you have up there is actually a Roman medallion depicting Olympias with her snakes. Okay. There is one coin that has Olympias on it, and it's Olympias and Alexander. It's one that he had struck. And there's one other image of Olympias from the time on another coin, and that's it, or the medallion. So that's later, that's from Rome. But so she has this association with snakes. Plutarch says, and Plutarch is one of our sources for this period, but he's writing many, many years after. Okay, he's like 5 centuries after this. He claims she slept with snakes in her bed. Okay. Now, and that Philip was very unhappy about that. Now, to a modern ear, that sounds like she was having affairs, right? That's like a euphemism here. which probably not, yeah, she probably was not sleeping with snakes in the bed. But supposedly that was why Philip married more after her. Okay, which again goes with the whole supposed love story, like he wasn't gonna marry any more wives after her, but then she, she just has to have these snakes in her bed and I just can't handle it. Um. Did anybody see, and this is go 20 years ago now, the Angelina Jolie as Olympias Alexander, who was I was gonna say it's Irish Alexander,
Colin Farrell.
Colin Farrell, yeah, from like 2004, 2005, somewhere in
I
there.
have to do a watching stuff.
We might have to do, it's not great. But there's this scene where she's sitting there with, and she's got, little Alexander with her and they're playing with snakes and it's, that's all I could find when I was looking for the pictures here. Yes.
Yeah, and the association with snakes too is that, snakes are poisonous. So the idea that she is venomous, yes,
Yeah.
that she is plotting, to kill whoever she needs to. Olympias is very quickly, even in her lifetime and her son's lifetime, attacked as being too independent, too, forthright in what she wants. And that reputation just continues to decline over. Everybody loves Alexander in Rome. Nobody likes Olympias because they look at her as, she, whether they had the evidence or not, she's responsible for Philip's assassination. She has some hand in it, whether she ordered it or whether she had information about it and didn't do anything with it.
Yeah. She's a woman who has some power.
Yeah.
And that's all you really need to know. In history, a woman who has some power, there's going to be reasons to knock her down.
And she was very intelligent. She was
Yes.
very, very good at statecraft. She's the one who's actually in charge of Macedonia and Greece when Alexander is fighting in Persia and India. So that goes to show you how much he trusted her.
This is another, there's so many women in history where you go, wow, if only that person had been born a man, it would have been a different, because she, would have taken over for her father or, conquered Macedonia or something, who knows. Just a rundown on the wives, okay? Philip's first wife is Odata. I might be mispronouncing these, so forget. She's an Illyrian princess. She is the mother of his first child, a daughter named Siman. The second wife is named Philia. She's a Macedonian noblewoman. They do not appear to have had any children, or at least any who survived. The third wife is Misipolis. She's Thessalonian and produces another daughter for him, Thessaloniki. Okay. The fourth or fifth wife is Philina. She is a Thessalian dancer. Okay, so that's another reason why we're not sure if she was a wife or a concubine. Okay. But she gets listed with the wives because she produces his first legitimate son, and that is Philip III Arrhidaeus. Okay. But young Philip is not well. Okay. When you read about him, he probably had Down syndrome, maybe, or something akin. Okay, so some kind of cognitive issue. So he was not going to rule, and it was evident very quickly. And then of course you have Olympias. And then after Olympias, we have Maida, who is a Thracian princess. They do not have any children, or at least any who survived. And then the last wife is Cleopatra Eurydice, okay, who is a Macedonian noblewoman. And she produces for him a daughter and a son. And that is going to be a problem for Alexander because as a Macedonian, Cleopatra Eurydice has a higher rank than Olympias, even though Olympias has an adult son who is the understood heir. Okay, so, and all of them survived him, which is astonishing in itself.
See,
Yeah,
so that name Cleopatra, is
yes,
that how it ends up in Egypt?
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, the Macedonians are not very original when it comes to naming daughters.
nobody's original with.
I know, but it's really bad with them because there's a bunch of Cleopatras floating around at the same time in different parts of the Macedonian world.
In fact, Olympias and Philip have a daughter who they named Cleopatra.
Yeah.
So Alexander has a younger sister that nobody ever hears about because she gets married off quite young. But
And you'll notice that, better than half those wives are coming from territories that Alexander or that Philip has conquered.
Yeah.
And they're part of the peace treaty in order to basically cement the fact that the Macedonians are dominant.
It's something to be said that he does not have any, he probably tried to have children with Phila, the first Macedonian noblewoman. The Thessalian noblewoman, okay, yeah, you've got a child there. You don't have a child with the Thracian, okay? You don't have a child with some of the others. That could indicate that this was like, okay, you're useful to me politically, go over there. You know, I'm gonna consummate the marriage and then I'm gonna leave you alone. I'm not interested, whatever. There's a lot of political reasons too. It might not have just been that he wasn't producing children. We know he had a couple of children outside of all of those marriages too. Because they had to be gotten rid of at some point.
Yeah.
There's mentions of it in the sources, but well, who knows?
And that's the thing too, is that, depending on where you're coming from, Macedonia, Greece, whatever wherever you're coming from, that is the kind of prejudice order that everyone in your country expects the wife to be and the child to come from. And that's why Alexander and Olympias are so worried about this last wife, because she is from there and she is producing the children who are there. So,
She's young and fertile.
yes.
At a time when Olympias was hitting the end of her childbearing years. Okay, so Alexander's born on or around the 20th of July. You notice we have that date. Okay. In 356 BC. He is, as I said, the second son of Philip. He's the first child between Philip and Olympias. Olympias said that he was conceived on their wedding night because the night before the wedding, she had a dream that a lightning bolt struck her in the womb. This is, of course, said after Alexander has conquered part of the world. So, and we want to establish Alexander as a very powerful person and a demigod. So, say what you will about that.
That's supposed to represent Zeus.
Yes.
Yeah, or just a god. Yeah.
No,
It's
it's Zeus. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll get into that story because that one gets even more convoluted and fun.
Yeah. So the stories assigning divinity to Alexander are very difficult to date because we have no evidence of them from while Alexander was alive. Okay. That doesn't mean there wasn't, that's just disappeared. It's been a long time, but odds are they came from after. Okay. At least one other author claims that Olympias denied these stories. Okay. But most of the others say that she told them and encouraged Alexander to act upon them, to internalize them. And we know that Alexander believed, okay, or presented himself as believing that he was the son of Zeus. And then we can add other gods to that because he says that he's the son of Amun-Ra once he's, in Egypt, and he adds other gods to that as well. So, I'm pretty sure she wasn't struck by a lightning bolt because she would have been dead.
Yeah.
For sure.
And the other thing is she's not going to give that story while Philip is alive.
Yeah.
Because then that means that Alexander is not his son.
Yeah. Right. So the birth of a healthy son puts Olympias in the position of his of Philip's primary wife, and she is there for 2 decades. Okay. He marries Meta, and then he marries Cleopatra Eurydice. Alexander is 15, 16 when they marry. So he seems to be pretty happy with Olympias, or at least not looking for more political alliances through marriage. Maybe that's a better way to put it. Happy isn't necessarily the right word there, but she is the primary wife for that time. Young Alexander, of course, comes up the same way that all the other Macedonian noble boys do, except he knows that he's, the son of the king and maybe a god, So he's going to learn hunting, he's going to learn warfare, he's going to learn horseback riding, and then he's going to get the proper educational type things, philosophy, math, natural philosophy, what we would think of as the sciences now, history, writing, that kind of thing, rhetoric. And of course, we have the story of the taming of Bucephalus. the image there is from the Edinburgh City Hall, City Chambers. And it was done in bronze in 1883 as Alexander taming Bucephalus. The story goes that Philip wanted to buy some horses from this horse trader that was coming around, and there's this absolutely gorgeous horse, oops, who won't let anybody near him. And so Philip says, no, I'm not gonna pay for a horse as good looking as this horse is, and as much as I want to put him into my stables to stud, I can't control him, so I don't want to do that. So young Alexander notices that the way Philip had approached him was with the sun behind him. So Bucephalus saw the shadow before he saw the man, and it spooked him. So Alexander says, no, I think I can tame this horse. And so he approaches him from the other side, and he's very calm and quiet and you know, does things that are good for horses. I don't know anything about horses. And so he tames it, and he rides Bucephalus until that horse dies. And the horse dies of natural causes, supposedly lives for 30 years or 20 years, excuse me, 20 years, which is a long time for a horse. Where he died, Alexander founded a town called Bucephalus. Yeah. Yeah, so this is supposed to be one of his, this is supposed to be one of the indications of his demigodness. If you want to be more pragmatic, it's an indication that he was paying attention to what was going on, which really these days feels like you need to be a demigod to do that, so.
And usually too, what happens with these,
That was when he was like 10.
and it takes years to train a horse to be a war horse at this point in time. So you're with that animal most of the time you're growing up in order to get it used to you on its back, used to, you know, following your commands. And again,
Over its own instincts
Yeah.
and fear.
and again, no saddles, no stirrups. It's basically the bit and the rein, and then basically a horse blanket on its back
Yeah.
that you're fighting with. So it's tough. Again, you're controlling it by moving your knees, you know, squeezing your knees one way or the other in order to indicate what you want the animal to do. So it does take a lot to get these horses. That's why they're so valuable. Why he valued this one so much was that supposedly it was wild, he was wild, they broke each other.
Yeah. And then, you know, the other thing that tamed Alexander was teaching by Aristotle. Okay. So when Alexander is 13, he has to have a proper education at that point. It's time to stop playing with the horses and learn history and stuff like that. Learn how to be a good king. Okay. And so Philip hires Aristotle. Okay. Philip had destroyed Aristotle's hometown about a decade prior. He had just gone through and razed it. He had sold everybody into slavery. Now, of course, Aristotle was in Athens, being Plato's student, and you know, not there at the time, but of course he was offended by it, as you might be. So his price was Philip reinstating the town, okay, and finding all of those people that he had sold into slavery a decade prior and taking them back home. And Philip did it, okay, which shows you the value of Aristotle, okay, because there would be no reason for Philip to back down on that kind of a military victory. Yes, so yes, Stagira was the hometown. Now, Aristotle is supposed to teach Alexander how to be a good king. And Aristotle is, of course, the student of Plato, and Plato is famous for his ideals of the philosopher king. Okay? The idea that a king can't just be a military figure or a strong man, has to be someone who is well educated and who can think and reason clearly. So an excellent choice to teach a king to be. He's not alone in these classes. I should say companions, not companion. Ptolemy, Hephaestion, Seleucus, Perdiccas, Cassander, Cletus the Black. Yeah, there's a few other ones too, who are in there, and they're all of an age, and they're all, you know, sons of noblemen, and they all know that they're going to be in charge someday. So I imagine that was not a easy to control class. So Aristotle introduces logic, philosophy, morality, art, history, rhetoric, all of those fun things. He gives Alexander a copy of the Iliad with his own annotations, right, which Alexander carries with him for the rest of his life. Supposedly sleeps with it under his pillow. Yeah. Hephaestion, keep Hephaestion in the back of your head. Hephaestion is Alexander's cousin, okay? Cousin or second cousin. And they have the closest possible relationship they can have, okay? He compares his relationship with Hephaestion to Achilles' relationship with Patroclus, thank you. And Achilles and Patroclus were cousins and they were probably lovers, and Alexander and Hephaestion were probably lovers. Okay. I have noted in other classes, but I'll just take the moment to do again. Don't think of sexuality in the modern way when you're looking at the ancient world. Okay. Don't think of heterosexual and homosexual. Sexuality in the ancient world was about who had power and who didn't. It was about who was the active partner and who was the passive partner. Okay. And if you were masculine and strong if you were the active partner, and you could never be masculine and strong if you were the passive partner, irrelevant of your sex. Okay. So when you think about whether or not Alexander, is conducting this love affair with his cousin, the thing to remember is not to think like, oh, Alexander's gay, okay? Because there's a very big thing now of let's find historical figures that are gay. Okay, there's been people say Julius Caesar was gay and Alexander was gay, and the thing to remember there is no, they were in charge. Alexander was the king. The king can have anybody he wants. Okay. And that's the end of it. It's not, attraction attraction came into it, but it wasn't like the modern day. It wasn't such a straightforward binary as we tend to think of it. So just remember that when we talk about them. All right. So by the time he's 16, Alexander is acknowledged as Philip's heir, and he gets to act as regent while Philip is outside the city, having himself a little war with Thrace. Okay. And while Philip is away, some people from Thrace, the Medes, decide that they are going to invade Macedonia, probably with the hope of pulling Philip back home. Okay. And Alexander runs them over, absolutely runs them over. And then the next year he goes back to Thrace with his father. Olympias is in charge in the kingdom. Well, they're both gone. Okay. And ends up saving his father's life in a battle, which he then supposedly cites as something he regrets later on when he argues with his father. You talked about the Thracian campaign already, I think so.
And you'll notice that, Alexander wins this campaign without his father, and then ends up going into this territory and puts together a city, Alexandropolis. This is one of, the idea of the Alexandrias. Like today we
This is
think
the first of those.
Yeah, the most famous one that is still in existence is, Alexandria in Egypt. There were Alexandrias all over Central Asia, all the way into, the southern and central parts of Afghanistan, into the Indus Valley. Anywhere he went, he settled veterans, and then, surprise, surprise, all the cities were named after himself, except for the horse.
That? I mean, was that done
Yeah.
in the ancient world? I mean, you named a city after yourself. So
Philippi in
Philip
Greece
did that?
is
Yeah. And the idea is you're putting those veterans, men who are at the end of their military careers because they're older or they've been injured, you put them in there to garrison the area, because it's basically, think of it like a frontier or a fortress. You're settling it there, and you're leaving those men there in order to have a permanent population. And then you would actually also have people from your home territory leave and go settle in these cities. So literally you're setting up a
colony.
little colony, and it would have the bathhouses, the theaters, the agoras, the temples, just like any other Greek city anywhere else in the world. They really copy these. The idea is that they are setting up a cultural cultural colony.
Yeah, yes,
What is going to happen is they're hoping that these settlers, these veterans, and the Greeks who are going to come in later will intermarry with the natives and then bring them to a Greek culture and standard.
one thing to remember with this is we're talking about Alexander. His purpose with these conquests was very much to create what came to be called a Hellenistic world. Okay, which was Greek ideologies brought to you by Macedonian conquest. And that's better than everything else, so eventually everybody will be like us. But
And-
also combining some of the other parts too.
Yes, yeah, parts of the cultures that have previously existed that functioned and seemed to fit well. The Macedonians left in place.
Yeah.
And kind of blended.
You see this after too, Caesarea, it's named after Caesar. There's a couple of Tiberius cities in Europe, there's a bunch
I
of
would say
them.
there's a,
Yeah. Okay, so Alexander's proving himself to Philip. He is getting to the point where he can be left in charge of things. He's getting to the point where he can be ruling in places on his own for a while. Fantastic. Then in 338, Philip decides to marry the niece of one of his generals, okay, a man named Attalus, and her name is Cleopatra Eurydice, or Eurydice, you'll hear. Okay. This immediately reduces Olympias's position. So even though Olympias is the wife that's been there longer, she has produced the heir, okay, and she is a valued counselor to Philip, okay. Cleopatra producing a son who survives is going to outrank her immediately. Okay. And that son who survives is going to immediately outrank his now adult older brother. Yeah, or as good as adult older brother. So there is discussion amongst historians that Philip had decided he didn't like Alexander and Olympias anymore. He did not want Alexander as his successor. And so he was trying to, have a Macedonian successor. Okay. There's talk about this. There is little to no evidence that this was actually in his plan. Now, it's not like we have his journals where he wrote about what he was thinking every night, so it might have been his plan, but it doesn't make sense knowing what we know of him. Okay, that isn't logical with what we know of him. Okay. So at the wedding, and there were other people who didn't like Alexander because of Olympias and because of her foreignness, his foreignness, okay, because of that. So at the wedding, Attalus makes this speech about how he hopes that his niece is going to give Philip a legitimate son. Okay, now, this is also a shot against Olympias. Okay. This is saying that Olympias has been screwing around on him. Okay, that Alexander is not his son. Philip does not take it that way. Philip takes it as, okay, this is my general, uncle of the bride, he's a bit in his cups. We'll laugh it off. Alexander, having just been called a bastard, decides that he doesn't like that. Okay. And so he throws his cup at him and they almost come to blows. And Philip kicks him out and then sends him into exile. Says, you're gone. If you can't deal with this, how are you going to be king, right? It takes 6 months or so and some mediation between a family friend before Alexander comes back, and he had taken Olympias with him, and then she came back with him too, right? So there is now definite conflict. And at this point, Philip may be really hoping that he can supplant Alexander. Okay. So Cleopatra gives birth to a daughter within a year of the wedding, and then a son the year after. So we now have an infant who is potentially a danger to the 18-year-old. 2 years later, okay, Philip's daughter Cleopatra, this is Alexander's full sister, okay, his daughter with Olympias, is married to Olympias's brother, Alexander of Epirus, because that's what you do. And Philip is assassinated at that wedding. We know who killed him, who actually struck the blow, was a man named Pausanias. Okay, Pausanias may have been the former head of his bodyguard. He may still have been the head of his bodyguard. There's different, the sources say different things. He was in his bodyguard at any rate. And during the procession after the wedding, Pausanias basically jumps out from an alleyway and stabs him to death. Okay. Why, we don't know. And that's the interesting part. Okay. There's a few different options. Okay. The first one, and I'm not giving these in any particular order, but the first one is that there was rumor that Pausanias and Philip were having an affair, and that Philip had told Pausanias it had to stop for whatever reason. Okay, Philip had broken it off. Again, the issue with that is he's the king, and he can have whoever he wants, and his bodyguard would know that. So Pausanias, within the context of the culture, it doesn't make sense for him to feel like he needed to kill him over that. Which is not to say human nature and all of that, but that's one possibility, that it was personal, and that's it. Okay. The next possibility is Olympias. Yeah. That Olympias, seeing what was going on, knew that Philip had to be gotten out of the way before there was any chance that that infant could be named king. Okay. So Olympias gets him out of the way. The third possibility is Alexander. Okay. Alexander sees what's going on and knows he needs to get his father out of the way. The last possibility is that Pausanias was hired by the Athenians, particularly Demosthenes, who Jay talked about in the last class, was the most outspoken anti-Philip person in probably all of Greece. Okay. Now, it's unlikely that it was personal. Okay. I think it's unlikely that it was Demosthenes. Okay. That just, at this point, does not really make sense. I think it's unlikely that it was Alexander by himself, personally. Because if he had wanted to get his father out of the way, there were other ways he could have done it. There were other ways he could have done it that would have proven his strength. There were enough wars going on that he could have accompanied his father in a war and, just not saved his life like he had the previous year or 2 years previous. Okay.
Hunting accident.
A hunting accident. That's one of those. That's, famously. Okay. Yeah. The man drinks a lot. He could poison him. That would have been kind of, not great for a man to be poisoning another man, but no one would know. And then there's Olympias, who has all the reason in the world to kill him. Okay. Now here's the problem. Alexander sees the assassination. Okay. He runs over to his father, basically confirms that he's dead. His friends are already chasing Pausanias out of the city. Okay. Alexander hops on his horse, I'm assuming it was Bucephalus, and he and his companions go after Pausanias. They find him a couple miles outside of the city and beat him to death. Makes perfect sense, right? So you have this situation, the king has been killed, his son, who is the next king, has avenged him. Okay, how, he's proven his strength immediately. No one's going to question that that was the right thing to do because everybody saw Pausanias kill him. But it's also silenced him. So if Pausanias had anything to say about, say, Alexander or Olympias paying him, well, he's not going to say that. So it makes Alexander look good, but it removes evidence. Okay. So we don't know who arranged the death. Okay. It would be one of the great, I don't know if it's an irony, it would be immensely funny in terms of historical events if it really was just a lover's quarrel that got out of hand. And so part of me kind of likes that idea just because it's it undermines what we think is actually going on, but I think it was Olympias myself.
And nobody in the Macedonian court is going to accuse Alexander
No,
of doing that because they already know he has a temper. And if he makes that accusation, or if somebody makes that comment, he's gonna have them killed. He'll either kill them or I'll have his companions kill them.
So there was a court system, but
Yeah. And technically, you're looking at it as the king is the final arbitrator.
and there was no question that Alexander was gonna be king at that point. What had happened with Philip, where his nephew immediately succeeded and he was made the regent, did not happen here. That was not gonna happen here. So, Philip's heart stops beating and Alexander is king. And he is going to run with that, and run with it all the way to India. Let's take a break. It's 10:30, come back in 5-7 minutes or so, and then we'll pick up with Alexander beginning his father's campaigns that Philip had not yet completed. Started, really. All right, so we're back here and Alexander is now king and he's gonna go conquer Persia. So, okay, so Philip has already been, Philip had already been planning an invasion of Persia. Remember here, we have people who want to think of themselves as Greek and who want to embrace Greek culture and embrace Greek history. And so they grab onto this idea of we need to attack Persia in retribution for the Persian Wars around 500. Okay, so a century and a half earlier.
And remember that Macedonia basically let the Persians go through their
Yes.
territory without fighting.
Yeah.
So,
But they're Greek now, so it's okay. So Philip had been making arrangements to get together armies with the Greek states and, you know, just go up against Persia and hopefully run them over.
yeah, and this was not an easy task because Philip and Alexander actually have to defeat Thebes and Athens in order to make this take place. And part of the peace treaty was that all of the city-states in Greece, save for Sparta, were supposed to contribute men or money or ships or provisions in order to get this invasion rolling. Basically, what Philip was going to do is he's going to take all the men of military, or as many of the men of military age out of Greece as possible with him.
Yeah.
To basically have them as part of the Macedonian army so they couldn't rebel. Well, when he gets stabby, the Thebans are like, well, we don't need to do that anymore, and so they're going to revolt.
Yeah. And this is also because, okay, Alexander and Philip, okay, so they had fought at Chaeronea against the Thebans, right? This is one of those battles when Alexander goes on campaign with them. And one of the things they do is destroy the Theban sacred band. Now, the sacred band is this very elite group. It is 300 soldiers. It is 150 couples. Okay. With the idea that you are going to fight harder for your lover standing next to you than any other soldier. Okay. This would be the exception that proves the rule of what I was talking about with sexuality in the ancient world. These were what we would see as committed gay couples in the modern day. Okay. They were believed to be unstoppable. And until they ran into Philip, they really were. Philip had them killed to the man. Okay. The ones that weren't killed in the battle, he had executed. And the Thebans took that personally.
And the thing is that after Chaeronea, what ends up happening is that Philip and Alexander, after the sacred band are killed, they do the funeral rites for them as they should have, which is basically cremation, and then they give the ashes back to the Thebans. But the Thebans, you know, one, their elite group is wiped out, and two, what had been kind of a client state now all of a sudden is the one that's the dominant one in fighting in this.
So Thebes revolts. Alexander sacks the city and sells its entire population in slavery.
He levels the city too. So the walls, temples, the housing. The only place that is safe is the house of a Theban philosopher that Alexander liked. And one of the things that will end up happening is later on, Alexander has regrets about this, about what he ended up doing. And so he will have the city rebuilt and kind of repopulated. This is again, this instance of Alexander, his meteoric and explosive temper, and then later on having some regret to it. Now, Philip, before he's assassinated, actually has a portion of the Macedonian army that has crossed into Turkey. So there's like 13,000 Macedonian soldiers who are waiting there. And they find out that Philip is dead, and then find out that Alexander is king. As Alexander is raising these troops, Thebes revolts. And so Thebes is a lesson to the rest of Greece.
And to all the Greek client states and the Greek colonies that are in Asia Minor.
Yeah, don't make me turn around. Basically, don't make me come in and put you down because I will. The only city that does not contribute to this enterprise is Sparta. And by this point, Sparta is just a shadow of its former self. It's so weakened, it's not even an issue as far as Alexander and the Macedonians are concerned. And at this point, the early years of Alexander's campaigns, this is his father's army, and these are his father's generals. Okay, he does not choose who is in command of different parts of the army at this point in time. These are all older men who have been, fighting with Philip for a couple decades by this point, who are going to follow Alexander on this.
Keep in mind that group of his companions that I talked about that was educated with him are mostly the sons of those men.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have this situation where he has his father's generals, but he also has his future generals who are their sons or nephews or, otherwise related.
Yeah.
So the line of succession is drawn very clearly. All right. So he hops across to Asia Minor, collects those soldiers, and runs over the Persians of the Granicus River.
Now, here's the sad but funny part about the Granicus River. This is almost, the campaign begins and almost ends here. Because what ends up happening is this Granicus River, there's only a few places that you could ford, that you could cross, because there's not a lot of bridges that are going to be there. And the Persians have, the way the Persians are set up, they put together their empire is they have divided into provinces that are called satrapies. And each of these has its own satrap, who's basically the governor, who raises his own army, okay, in order to defend his territory. And if there is a large outside invasion, they send word to the king, okay, the Persian king, that there's an invasion so that he can start raising the other satrap armies. So he gather a huge army and then march to whatever, province is being under attack. Well, what happens at the Battle of Granicus is that it's just this particular Persian army, this province's army that's meeting Alexander, and they're blocking these fords. And Alexander gets frustrated. His infantry is on one side of the river. Alexander starts crossing the river with his cavalry. And the Persians respond by sending their cavalry in the river, and they start fighting. Alexander ends up getting hit in the helmet with an axe blow that stuns him, obviously. And he's kind of leaning over because it's a good hit. It doesn't split his helmet, but it concusses him. As he's leaning over, he gets stabbed in the leg as well. And it is a man, one of the companions, Cletus the Black, who ends up saving Alexander's life because he ends up cutting off the arm of the Persian who's getting ready to behead him.
Wow.
Okay, and then when they, the fighting actually starts, then the Macedonian infantry, that phalanx, starts to cross the river en masse to try to get to Alexander, and that panics the Persians. That satrap ends up basically abandoning his army, and he flees back towards the capital of that province. The Persian soldiers who surrender, Alexander is actually rather merciful with them. They could either join the Macedonian army or they disband. And this is the thing that's different with Alexander, is that as he's going into these areas, if the officers, the soldiers, or the governors will basically surrender to him and swear allegiance with him, he leaves them in place. Because that, he's looking at it as, if it's the administrators, they already know how to run this province. They already know how to collect taxes, how to keep order in there, who will be friendly, who won't be friendly. It's easier to leave people in place who know how to do this. And then he doesn't have to leave as big a garrison behind because he has to split part of his army off for every area he takes in order to put a garrison into it. So he ends up recovering from this injury, and Alexander actually has an excellent plan of how he's going to do this. Yes, he can chase the satrap back to the interior and take that city. But there are a lot of cities that are along the coast of Turkey that are very large, that are heavily fortified, and also where a lot of the Persian Navy is garrisoned. And so Alexander is looking at this as, I can go into the interior and basically leave Greece and Macedonia vulnerable to these Persian ships and soldiers that might be raised, who sail across the Aegean and start burning the Greek heartland up. So Alexander goes through the process of conquering the coastline, taking all of those cities. If they surrender, then their walls are intact. They are part of Alexander's new empire. Again, the governors can stay there in the way that he presents it with because a lot of these are the Greek colonies that have been there for centuries. He's saying that he's finally liberating them from the Persians. If they do that, there are going to be some that refuse to do this. And so Alexander has to go through the process of besieging them.
So question about Granicus.
Mhm.
As he's crossing the river, and I know that you don't know a lot about the battle, but he really can't set up phalanxes.
Not like not
I
like
mean, in
he
other
would-
words, this was not
this is
that
not a
they had a
set piece battle.
superior phalanx
Mhm.
and nobody could reach them because they had
Yeah,
18.
this was
This was a brawl,
Mhm.
man to man.
Yeah, across the yeah. And that's the thing with
The Macedonians were
Yeah.
more vicious than the Persians.
and yeah. And so yeah, they end up breaking them. And with the Persians, a lot of them, they're used to fighting from a distance. So, a lot of archers, a lot of javelin throwers. Usually when it came to the Persians, their heavy infantry were Greek mercenaries. And then, the rest of the army was filled out by light infantry. For the Persians, where they're coming from, their original homeland, the Iranian plateau, that's horse culture. So they're cavalry, they're cavalrymen, but they're not, don't think of it like knights charging into each other. Cavalrymen as I'm going to shoot the hell out of you with arrows until you get worn out, and then I'm going to come in and nail you with a sword or a mace.
Or
The
behead you.
Yeah, the Persian army basically their officers panic because the Macedonians start moving en masse, and then they find out that there's a portion of the Macedonian army that has found a ford like a mile further down the river, and they're coming as a phalanx to come into the Persian flank. So that's the thing. Alexander is very brilliant at exploiting what is in front of him as he's going through there. One thing that is going to happen is that while he's merciful to a degree towards the Persians if they surrender, when it comes to those Greek mercenaries, like I was talking about, he annihilates them to a man. Because the idea is that, you're fighting against our traditional enemy for money instead of fighting alongside us to avenge the Persian Wars. And there are instances at Granicus and especially at Isis where you have hundreds of Greek mercenaries who are willing to surrender, and Alexander will not allow that to happen. And this is after the battle is over, and they're massacred because he's proving to the other Greeks, if you don't come in line, you're dead. Thebes was the example for the homeland. Granicus and Isis are the reckoning for what is going to happen on the battlefield.
There are mercenaries further in that hear about this and leave.
Yes.
So they get the point, and he does not kill them.
No, they will, a lot of them
They have a
defect to
point.
him because
Yeah.
again, these are professional soldiers. So it's, Alexander, when he goes into the Persian Empire, has about 35,000 soldiers, professional soldiers. Plus, he fills out his ranks with mercenaries as he goes along. The Persians had the ability to raise hundreds of thousands of soldiers, just not as well equipped or trained. But it's numbers, it's attrition, basically. If the Persians can actually grind the phalanx down and get in behind it, they have a good chance of winning against it. Because again, the phalanx is a very non-flexible formation. You're basically, the only direction you can go is forward. You can't really go left or right too much, and you can't turn around to fight somebody behind you.
So going back to the thing about the Persians, or about how the government, Alexander deals with it. The Persians were also ones who would conquer an area, and if the people capitulated, they would leave the people who were
Yeah.
in charge. So when Alexander is doing this, he is essentially doing what these people were accustomed to already.
Yeah.
Okay. So that does help with it. The other thing he does is he starts integrating the people who defect to him into the army, into his army, alongside the Macedonians, alongside the Greeks. this immediately pisses off the Greeks and Macedonians.
Mhm.
We will come back to that.
Yeah.
Okay, because they do not like the idea that they are going to be fighting alongside Persians.
Yeah, and with Persia, the Persian king has the title King of Kings. He is the top of that pyramid, but there are lesser kings and leaders beneath him that all swear obedience to him. So for Alexander coming in like that, this is this is one of the things that really alienates Alexander with the Macedonians and Greeks that are going to be with him, is the fact that he is adopting Persian culture and customs. And initially, he doesn't force the Macedonians and Greeks to kind of follow along with that. But eventually he's going to expect them to do the same sort of court treatment.
Obeisance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the bowing or not looking at him, like looking at the floor instead of looking at his face, or bowing in front of him, or kneeling. That's going to piss off a lot of the people that, he starts this campaign off with, because they're like, we're here to defeat them, not become them. Why are you doing this?
There's, I forget which of the sources it is, but there's somebody that starts an argument with him because he starts wearing trousers. And that's Persian and effeminate, so. So the next stop, and here's a map finally, sorry.
Yeah.
The next stop is Sardis. The governor of Sardis walks 8 miles out to the city and goes, here, the
Yeah.
keys.
That's the one who was
We're happy to be
defeated.
part of your empire
Yeah.
now.
That was the one who was defeated at Granicus. Because he realizes that, the deeper you go into Turkey itself, okay, you don't have a lot of major cities. You don't have a huge city states as you're going through. Sardis is right. A little bit in the interior from the coastline, but the majority of big cities are actually along the coast, because, in this period, a lot of Turkey itself, the interior of Turkey, is very mountainous, and it's pretty dry. So it's not easy to go through and have, massive fields in order to have huge city states.
So where was Granicus?
Okay, so Granicus is right here. You see that little.
Yeah.
Let's
So
look.
it's not that, it's not
Sardis
that,
is here.
it's not really that deep into Turkey itself. And again, it's that instance where if this Persian had been able to land that blow, this war would have been over almost immediately.
So the man who is in charge of Persian Empire at this point is Darius III. Okay, he picks up his court and takes them to Babylon. Okay, and sorry, it's right here, and and then starts putting together an army, and he puts together an army of about 250,000.
Yeah.
Give or take. That is the number that the ancient sources tell us. So sometimes you want to look at those and divide by 10. Sometimes.
It's probably closer to about 150,000 at that.
Or divide by half.
Yeah. Well, again, and the idea that you inflate those numbers is it makes the victory looks that much
Yeah.
more
Right.
glorious.
Yeah.
So the Persian capital itself is, surprise, the city is named Persepolis. Okay, and what the Persian court kind of did was, when it was at peace, they would have a traveling court. Basically, what would happen is the Persian king and his closest advisors and followers would leave Persepolis and then go to some of these, in many cases, much more ancient cities. Okay, especially in Mesopotamia. Babylon was one that, the Persians would go to quite a bit. They'd go to Susa, Actibana. They would go to these different areas. The idea being is that the Persian king is showing up and surprising his satraps. They know that he's coming, but the idea is that he's going to be there with his court and kind of the core of the Persian army to make sure that they're not going to rebel. Okay, especially when it comes to this area of Mesopotamia, modern day Iraq. This is already an ancient civilization with cities that have been there for, thousands of years. And they have been conquered by the Persians, but there's still the feeling that they do not want to be part of the Persian Empire. So that's why it's so important for the Persian kings to keep going into these areas. Now, another thing that makes Babylon important is the fact that it's sitting, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. It's an easy way to transport men and supplies as they're going north, so that they could try to confront Alexander somewhere in southern Turkey. What Darius wants to do is basically bottle Alexander up in this northern part. If Alexander can get into the plains in these areas, he's going to be able to operate pretty much however he wants to. So Darius is, scrambling in order to block him at these mountain passes so that he can't get through. Now, the next major battle is going to take place, and this is the first time that you're going to have Alexander and Darius on the same battlefield. This is again, it's named after the Isis River, which is basically in this, it's going to be right here. Okay, it is along, the Mediterranean coastline. This is a valley, a mountain valley, and the Isis River goes from the mountains and empties into the Mediterranean Sea. This is kind of a really narrow, boxed-in area where Alexander and Darius are going to fight. This is really terrain that neither one of them wanted, but it's going to be more advantageous to the Macedonians. The Macedonian army is less numerous, so it doesn't have to take up such a huge, front in order to bring all of its men into combat. Even if the Persians are, a 250,000 or only 100,000, there's not enough room for all of their soldiers to be in the battle line all at once. So they have a portion of their army set up in order to fight against Alexander, and the rest of them are just basically waiting to get onto the battlefield. So the Persians can't get their whole number in there. Now, what will end up happening is this is another one of those great moments in history, because the Macedonians and the Persians almost pass each other, going in different directions, because they're looking to confront each other, but this is before there's satellites, before there's spy planes or anything like that. The only way you could, basically find out where the enemy is by sending out cavalry as scouts. And it's these two cavalry forces that start skirmishing with each other on this, this river plain of Isis. And then that starts bringing in the rest of these armies as they're coming in. Now, for the Macedonians, again, this is perfect because this area where they're going to fight is relatively flat. So it's perfect phalanx country. And what will happen is you have the Macedonian phalanx with one flank anchored by the Mediterranean, and the other flank is leading up into the foothills of those mountains. And what you'll have is Alexander is using the phalanx basically as an anvil. He's having them advance to hold the Persians in place. Alexander's not commanding the infantry. He is commanding the cavalry. He's commanding the hammer. The idea is that, the spearmen hold the enemy in place, and the cavalry hits them in the flank or hits them from behind or breaks through the front line in a weak spot. Alexander is brilliant when it comes to finding the weakness in an enemy line. He figures out where Darius is at. Because again, at this point, if you're those kings, you're the generals, you're in the front line because your armies need to see that you are going to be there. You have other generals and officers who are going to be with you. But generally, you're there to keep, your troops' morale up. And what will end up happening is that with Alexander, he figures out where Darius is at. And as the battle is starting and the Greek phalanx or the Macedonian phalanx is moving in, Alexander takes all of his heavy cavalry, his companion cavalry, those guys that he grew up with, his bodyguards, his shock troops, plus the light cavalry, and he charges at the line, the point of the Persian line where Darius is at, and Darius panics, and he flees the battlefield. Okay, so, and here's the crazy thing, Darius had been so confident in victory that he brings his mother, he brings his wife, he brings his daughters with him. Think about the first battle of Bull Run in the Civil War, where, you're bringing people along in order to see what's going to end up happening. So Darius breaks, and he and his bodyguards take off. The rest
Leave his
of
family behind.
yeah, leaves his family behind. The rest of the Persian army is still fighting. Isis is not an easy battle for Alexander, because while he's able to chase Darius off the battlefield, that Persian army is still 3 or 4 times the size of his army. What helps him is that those Persian soldiers who had been waiting at the back, who couldn't get into the battle, see that Darius takes off and they're like, well, I'm not staying here. And they leave too. And unfortunately, it's the Greek mercenaries and the Persian troops that are stuck fighting against the Macedonians then are the ones that are gonna pay for this battle. Because once the Persians start to leave, their infantry and cavalry that couldn't get involved in the fight take off, that means that the Persian camp is open, but more importantly, the back end of that Persian line is now vulnerable to Alexander's cavalry hitting it. And so what will happen is the Persian commander who's left behind, which I'm sure that had to be great, is the one who's going to negotiate the surrender to basically save as many of his soldiers who are still fighting as possible. This is where Alexander is not going to allow those Greek mercenaries to survive. They basically end up forming on top of it. They form their own shield wall in a circle on this hill that is on the battleground, waiting to know whether Alexander is going to let them surrender or not, and be incorporated, if nothing else, be incorporated in his army or be disarmed and sent home. He does not do that. He has them killed, and then he does not let their bodies be cremated. So he's destroying them on the physical realm. He's also ensuring they can't get into whatever Greek afterlife there is. So this is a message to all the others. And this is where the other Greek mercenaries who are still part of the Persian army are like, you know what, we don't really want to piss Alexander off. So we're going to let this one go. Now, when Alexander's army overruns the Persian camp, they find the women of the royal court there. Alexander ensures that they are not raped, abused, or killed. They are basically incorporated into Alexander's family. The way that he's doing it, he's not going to marry them off to generals or marry them himself. The idea is he's looking at it as,
These are my royal sisters.
yes,
Yeah.
because the thing is, it's
Yeah.
like that's the thing. Alexander is not just interested in defeating the Persians. He wants to rule them. So the idea is that, you know, if he's absolutely brutal and bloodthirsty and kills his royal family, then that's going to get the rest of the Persians to fight to the end. And this is going to be a war that is never ending. The idea is that he's trying to a degree, you know, it's the idea of showing that there's mercy in that if you are incorporated into this new Macedonian empire, you'll survive and you'll probably thrive. This is the idea where Alexander is looking at, you know, these older cultures that have existed, again, for thousands of years before the Greeks, and looking at it as you take the best out of each culture and combine them and go from there. Now, what will end up happening is Alexander basically ends up keeping these royal women. They are under house arrest while he has them. But the idea is that, you know, their station is not threatened. Whatever, you know, their routine had been before that, they follow that. It's kind of interesting because the Darius's sisters and wives and daughters really didn't, you know, mind too much with Alexander. But Darius's mother was just like, okay, yeah, I'm your hostage. Get the hell away from me. Never talk to me again, you know, kind of thing. But I'm sure she was also pissed at Darius for not, you know, for abandoning them.
I think the sisters and the daughters and the wives probably expected to be treated,
Poorly.
at best, they expected to be raped. Like,
Yeah.
you know, at worst raped and killed. So I think when they're just put under house arrest, it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah. And Alexander put in bodyguards
Yeah.
that he trusted to ensure that nothing happened to them.
Now, here's where we see, if we haven't seen it before, the first real glimmer of how big Alexander's ego truly is. Okay. And keep in mind at this point, he is at the ripe old age of 21.
Mhm.
Okay.
And he's had two major battles.
Mhm.
And he just, you know, scored the huge one at Isis. But he's got to rest his army because, you know, his army, a lot of his men and animals have been injured. So he has to give them a chance to rest and recuperate and then also bring up supplies and bring in more reinforcements. So, you know, what the Persians lost at Isis is a drop in the bucket compared to what they have.
Yeah.
They can still raise potentially millions of more soldiers. They have a huge population advantage over Alexander. Now, Darius, after he leaves Isis, he ends up going back to Babylon because that's where he had moved the capital. That's where the treasury is located. Okay, so the treasury kind of moves with the court. The idea is Darius needs to get there with his bodyguards to make sure that now that he's been defeated, he doesn't have rebellions break out or rival claimants coming in there. Plus, he needs to be closer to the Persian homelands so that he can raise more soldiers in order to fight. And this is a point where there's, actually the main Persian army and Darius are not going to see Alexander again for probably another year. Okay, where they're not fighting against each other. Alexander is doing another thing where he's going to go down the coastline of Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and Egypt and secure what's left of this. Yeah. Alexander is going to, again, he has the choice. He can either try to chase Darius to Babylon, okay, but that leaves all of this territory that's still Persian behind. The rest of the Persian fleet is at Sidon and Tyre and at the city-states that are along this coastline. They can make strikes into Turkey or they can make strikes into Greece. So Alexander decides to basically secure his flanks. What he'll end up doing is he leaves part of his army to Isis to garrison those mountain passes, and then the rest of it, he marches down the Mediterranean coast. And he basically gives these cities the choice. You could surrender and be incorporated, okay, into this new empire, and really nothing changes other than the fact that you're changing allegiance to me. Most of those cities are like, well, we didn't really want to be part of the Persian Empire. It's not like we ever saw Darius in the first place, and we don't really care about him. So yeah, we'll defect over.
Put a different address on the taxes, that's it.
Pretty much,
Yeah.
yeah. The one city that holds him up is this city of Tyre. Okay, this is, there's an old city that used to be right on the coast that had been abandoned and it was in ruins. About a mile out into the Mediterranean is an island where the new city of Tyre is located. The people there were willing to break away from the Persian Empire, but they didn't want to be part of Alexander's either. They basically said, we just want to be neutral. That was the wrong thing to say. Because what Alexander is going to do is when he issues the ultimatum to have them surrender, they refuse. And the only way you could really get to the city is by boat from the coastline. And the people in Tyre are like, well, eventually Alexander's going to be tired of having his army sitting on the coastline and he'll renegotiate, and we get to stay neutral. That's not what Alexander does. All of those cities that had surrendered to him, that had elements of the Persian Navy, that's now the Macedonian Navy. So he puts up the naval blockade of Tyre. And Tyre has, these city walls that are like 60 to 80 feet high, straight-sided. There's very few ways you can get onto this island to actually attack the place. Alexander's looking at it as well, and this siege is going to drag on for 8 months. And in these 8 months, Alexander is going to get more and more and more pissed off. He ends up having his engineers rip the old city of Tyre's ruins apart in order to build a mile-long causeway, an artificial bridge from the beach to the city of Tyre in order to bring up siege engines so that he can attack the city from every side. And eventually the Macedonians are going to overrun the city and they end up massacring all the men that are there. And then the women and children are sold into slavery. And the new city of Tyre is ripped down stone by stone in order to show the rest of, these city-states, don't make me fight you. And then what happens is, once Tyre is gone, then all the cities below them to the south are like, hey, it's Alexander.
We like you.
Yeah. He next goes into Egypt. And Egypt had been a province that the Persians had had a lot of trouble with ever since they had taken this territory 250 years plus. There were always rebellions in Egypt because they didn't want to be part of the Persian Empire.
Because they were Egypt.
Because they were Egyptians. They saw themselves as the, even though their civilization was in decline, they were the oldest dominant power in that area. And so they had a hard time dealing with the fact that they were not a power anymore. Alexander goes into Memphis, okay, which was the old capital. And basically what he'll do is he tells the Egyptians, hey, you're liberated from the Persian Empire. you're part of, yeah, you're part of my empire now. And this is another instance where Alexander is brilliant the way that he does it. The Persian kings never took the title of pharaoh. Okay, the old idea of the Egyptian king. Alexander,
Go ahead, I've got pictures.
Alexander is going to take that title, but he's also going to go through the process of, he knows where the major Egyptian temples are going to be located. He knows what the major gods and goddesses of the areas he's going into. So one of the things that he does after he secures Memphis is he takes a select group of soldiers, basically his companions and some of the cavalry, and they leave the Nile Valley and they go into the Western Desert because they are going to an oasis where there is this temple to Amun Ra. And he goes there and he goes inside the temple by himself. Surprise, surprise. Everybody else is kind of standing around trying to figure out what to do. And he's in there for a long time talking to these priests. Now, by this point, he's already told everybody that he's not really the son of Philip. He's the son of Zeus. So he's semi-divine. He comes out of this temple of Ra and he's like, guys, I got even better news for you. I'm not just the son of one god, I'm the son of two. Because I'm also the son of Amun Ra. And these, you could just imagine, the Macedonians are sweating their asses off in this oasis, like, whatever. I don't even care at this point. Let's just go back to the valley and go through there. So he goes back to Memphis. He is coronated and crowned as the Egyptian pharaoh. He's not done in Egypt yet. This is where he's going to found the super version of Alexandria along the banks, well, basically in the river, the Nile Delta, right at the mouth of the Mediterranean. And the idea is Alexandria is going to be a Greek model city in Egypt. And that's not saying Greeks hadn't been in Egypt before this. They had been there for hundreds and hundreds of years before. But generally, the Egyptians had confined them to small settlements and towns further up the Nile River, closer to the Delta. Alexandria potentially could have been put into place as, well, it's definitely an administrative and commercial capital. Okay, it's also a spot where the Macedonians are going to put a lot of soldiers to basically watch over Egypt so that they can't rebel. But this is a city that is like Pella. It is laid out in Greek fashion. It's very, it's very different then compared to what it is now. Because a lot of what had been the things that Alexander is going to build and what his successors are going to build end up collapsing into the Mediterranean because of earthquakes. Okay, a lot of ancient Alexandria is gone. It's underwater. What's cool though is that you can go in, there are underwater archaeological teams that are mapping out Alexandria and they're pulling up statues, they're finding the temples, found a lot of good stuff to it.
Before we continue with Egypt, I want to go back to Isis for a moment.
Yes.
Okay. And that'll probably be where we finish it. Okay, so when I was talking about with Alexander's ego, okay. Darius looks at the situation and he decides that maybe it would be best to just give him what he seems to want. And so he sends him a letter and basically says, you can have all of the territory west of the Euphrates and your choice of my daughters if you stop. Okay.
So think of Euphrates, basically the western part of modern day Iraq, all the way to the Mediterranean, all of Turkey. It's a huge chunk of territory.
No, where is it?
Okay, so Tigris is
Oh, there, okay,
Babylon,
sorry.
Euphrates is.
Okay,
So
in
it's pretty much the entirety.
there. Of what he had taken already.
Yeah.
Essentially. So Alexander basically sends back a letter, says, that's nice, but you haven't addressed me correctly. I am now the Lord of all Asia.
Yeah.
And he refuses to acknowledge anything that doesn't address him as the Lord of all Asia or some equivalent.
Yeah, and basically Alexander's looking at it as, I'm not taking part of this empire so that I have to go to war with you again.
Yeah.
If you're surrendering everything.
Yeah. And Darius's offer of the daughter is smart because eventually that brings, if he were to have accepted, that would bring it back into his bloodline within a generation. And it would be brought back together again. And Alexander knew that. So one of the things about Isis, because I'm not the military historian, but I'm the cultural historian or a social historian. This is a mosaic in the House of the Faun in Pompeii. Okay, so Romans 300 years later. All right. This is 19 by 10 feet in size. It was the front piece, you walked into the house and this is what you were standing at, okay? The doorway was here. This mosaic has, oh, I don't have the note there, I think it's 3 million tiles. All right, and archaeologists have been able to tell that the person who owned this house would take his guests around the battle and point out all of the various elements.
See
okay?
the wear pattern of their feet.
Yeah, which some of this is wear pattern and some of it is Vesuvius. But so here's Alexander. This is one of the most commonly used images for Alexander that you'll see if you pick up a biography of Alexander. Odds are, 50% of them, this is on the cover. Here's Darius. Okay. They did not get this close.
No,
Ever, at any
Darius.
point in the battle. But it's a mosaic, not
Yeah, and the
Not
thing
bad.
that, one of the things that made Darius so easily identifiable was that he was riding a chariot that was heavily ornamented. The idea being that he's the center of the army. Again, he's going to be there to, attract attention.
so that, excuse me, there's a drawing of what it should look like completed. But this is a wonderful indication of how important Alexander was to Rome in particular, but to subsequent history in general. Okay, this was the centerpiece of this man's house. And these people had money, obviously they had a 3 million tile, but they this was that important to them. And I always love showing this because it shows how quickly and how importantly the Alexander mythology comes in. And they think that this was built around 100 years previously, 70 to 100 years previously, so around the time Caesar was conquering, and yeah, so actually it's a little earlier than Caesar, but yeah. So I just wanted to show that. Now you can go back to talking about Egypt. I didn't want to get too far ahead of us.
No, that's okay. And so, again, when it comes to, even art styles and culture, Alexander adopts a lot of this. So this is supposed to be, what will end up
That is
happening,
essentially
yeah,
Alexander.
what ends up happening after Alexander becomes pharaoh in Egypt, his general Ptolemy is going to take over that territory once Alexander is dead. And then the rulers of Egypt are Macedonians. Okay, they don't intermarry with the Egyptians, the Egyptian royal family. The Ptolemies are going to be brother sister or
Yeah.
uncle niece.
They take on some of the customs,
Mhm.
including the sibling marriage. But the only one of the Ptolemaic pharaohs who bothers to learn Egyptian is Cleopatra, the last
Yeah.
Cleopatra.
Yeah.
So-
And so this is Alexander, and he has the traditional, crown, the hood for the Egyptian pharaoh. And if we, were able to zoom in far enough, you would see that there's a vulture on one side and a cobra on the other, representing Upper and Lower Egypt, just as the pharaohs would have had thousands of years before this. And again, the statuary for this, when it comes to this depiction of Alexander, is very similar to what you would have seen in older pharaonic art. The idea that it's not art for art's sake, where it looks super realistic, it's more along the lines of functional. If you were, in ancient Egypt, the reason you'd have these statues being created was basically to have a backup copy of your body so that your soul would exist in the afterlife. That's what these are. I mean, these statues are basically, if the mummified body is destroyed, you have multiple statues around there so that because your soul, part of your soul, bounces back and forth between the afterlife and the world we're living. Let's go through. But one of the things that, this Alexandria that's going to be in Egypt, this will be Ptolemy's capital. This will be one of the successors' capitals. He doesn't go to Memphis. He doesn't go to the old Egyptian capital. He goes to the city that Alexander founded. Also, Ptolemy is going to be kind of, he's not going to be kind of, he is a prick when it comes to Alexander dying, because he's going to steal Alexander's body that's supposed to be going to Macedonia and has it put in Alexandria instead.
Well, Alexander did request that he be mummified in the Egyptian fashion.
Yeah.
So he just didn't let it leave.
Yeah,
And
there's-
then his body stayed in, basically in state in a temple, at least until 31 or 30 BC, because, we know that Octavian went in and looked at it and tried to take his ring off of him and broke his nose.
Hmm.
And that's the last we hear of Alexander's body, so he's somewhere in Alexandria. Yeah,
So that's the thing with that way, that's 300 years.
Yeah.
Between the time Alexander dies and the time that Octavian shows
almost
up.
exactly, yeah.
But we are,
Yeah, and so we'll start with Gaugamela
yeah,
next week because we don't wanna get partway through that.
Yeah.
He'll be talking about that for 2 hours on his own. Questions, comments, sarcastic remarks? Yes, please.
So this notion they're avenging the Persian
Mhm.
invasion of Greece.
it's
How do you, I mean, he was, it was a warrior culture. They liked to
Like,
They like-
conquer thing. I mean, was that just an excuse or?
it's a way to ensure that when Philip or Alexander, whichever one was in charge at the time, left with the majority of the Macedonian army and a huge chunk of the male Greek population, the rest didn't rebel. And it's a way to force mainland Greece to actually accept that the Macedonians are the dominant power now.
it's a feel-good war.
Yeah.
Think of it that way. It is a propagandistic. They want to conquer Persia. They want to conquer Persia. But in order for everyone to back them, they have to make it look like there's a good reason for it. If he could have had, Colin Powell with the vial of baby powder in the UN, he would have.
It's just amazing to see like Alexander when he's younger, he has Aristotle as his teacher.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Poetry and reasoning
Yeah.
and logic, and then his
Mhm.
head gets larger and larger, and it's like.
And forgets a lot of the-
To these people.
His great dream though was to take all of that knowledge and like he wanted a melting pot. That really is something to keep in
Yeah.
mind here. He wanted to create a Hellenistic, Greco-Persian, everything else in the Mediterranean melting pot. Okay, and so there is something philosophical about that. Yeah,
The idea of
he did forget a lot about that. Don't take me wrong.
the idea of incorporating the conquered people into the administration, into this new empire, also ensures they're not going to rebel. So there's practicality, and then there's altruism that goes in there, and a lot of his generals and soldiers, even men that he grew up with, could not understand what he was trying to do. And Alexander, he's gonna have a lot of mutinies that take place, and he's gonna have to put them down brutally.
He does have an unusual way of looking at things. They were very confused when he didn't immediately take one of Darius's daughters.
Yeah.
Because
That's
the
what he
logic
would
of
have done, yeah.
conquest, there's the idea of I want, to marry into the family for that level of conquest, but there also is the property crime of taking the daughter of your enemy, okay, or the wife of your enemy in that way. And they didn't understand why. And later when he goes on to marry Roxanne, okay, who is from the middle of nowhere and then some. They say, why are you marrying her? It would have made sense for you to marry one of the Persian princesses, but why are you marrying her? So you can follow his plans, his logic to it. And you can see why it confused a lot of people. He was very forward thinking in a lot of ways, with how to conduct the conquest, how to conduct the PR of the conquest, if nothing else. But yeah, he's one of those ones that's, what would have happened if he had
If
lived?
he had lived long,
Yeah.
probably would not have been a Rome, not a Roman Empire.
Yeah, there's that scene in the movie with Irish Alexander where he's talking to Ptolemy and he's like, oh, there's those people to the west, the Romans. I hear they're very plucky or something like that. And I just go, oh, we have no idea.
The thing is, his Alexander's last planned conquest was the invasion of the Arabian Peninsula, and never got off the ground.
All right. Other.
Was Memphis, Cairo?
Yes, it is Cairo today, yeah. And then just to the north of that was another Egyptian capital called Ijitawe, which replaced Memphis as the capital. Basically, they're all in the same region. Old Memphis is underneath Cairo right now.
Okay, thank you all. Everybody drive carefully.
Yes, be careful going home.
Yeah. And we'll see, remember, nope, if you're in the Civil War class, we don't have class 1.